I was going to say that SEO with Fat Joe is as peaceful as this, but then the birds are all having fights.
Did you know that Google personalizes many searches by city and Also Ask is the only tool to access live People Also Ask data at city level? Try for free at alsoasked.com.
Tired of SEO guesswork? Quadra's AI agent goes deeper to uncover high-impact optimizations and completes hours of SEO in minutes. Get started now.
Hello, conference. Nice to be here. So today I'm going to talk about how Google may think your content is helpful and hopefully talk you through how we can maybe establish that. Just a tiny bit about myself. I actually started my career back here in Brighton as a developer before moving into the world of SEO. I think everyone ends up in SEO. They don't necessarily always choose it. I worked with some amazing clients along that journey and then kind of almost come full circle back to working in development. And the reason I raise that is I guess, as SEOs, it's always important to draw on our previous experiences because that can really open up new opportunities and new ways of looking at it. And that's kind of what I do these days more is help the SEO team at Tug focus on how they can answer problems. So this is one of the problems that the team were talking to me quite a lot about is how can we see if AI thinks that the content that we're producing and what we optimize for our clients is actually helpful. Just very briefly, what I won't be talking about today is how to write content. I'm not a content person, you may see shortly. Also, how using ChatGPT to write content. I'm not going to talk about that. What the future of search look like, I don't know. I'm sure other people might think they know, but I don't think it's possible to totally predict that. But the reason I raise that is because this talk isn't necessarily going to be focused on AI overviews, which I know is quite a big part of what people are concerned about with AI. In SEO, but this does touch on that. It's just that's not what I'm talking about. And also really anything outside of Google search. So again, AI obviously interfaces with lots of other aspects of search, but this is really just about Google search, traditional search. So anyway, back to what I am talking about. There is no such thing as AI was a statement a good friend of mine, Dr. Bubbles, made. He's actually genuinely a doctor of bubbles. It was a dynamic viscosity PhD he did in that subject. So anyway, he's a very smart guy and he made this statement to me and I kind of thought, well, that's an interesting point of view. What does he mean by that? And he said, well, essentially all of AI is really essentially ML. And I suppose in a way he's kind of right. Obviously AI does exist as a thing, there's a multi-trillion-dollar business get there about AI and lots of people working in that field, but I guess his point was that at the heart of that is lots of different types of learning, machine learning, deep learning, and NLP to apply across the top of that to help us with these generative experiences. And the reason I talk about that is because I guess bringing back to the origins of SEO, what we were actually trying to do from the start is look at how we can control and influence where a page appears within search engine results page. And essentially that was kind of looking at an algorithm, looking at a form of machine learning and trying to understand how that might work and how it might interpret it and then what we were going to do to optimize against that. So essentially what I'm saying is that the Google algorithm has always kind of been a form of ML. And so if you start to understand that concept of AI potentially meaning more about ML, and as SEOs we've always been handling that, maybe that's a different way that we can think about it. Because I think as AI can make SEOs feel like there's less control and that we have less understanding about how content may or may not appear within a search result. And I suppose, again, go back to that point, if you then remind yourself that AI at the core is ML, large language models obviously springing off from that, essentially really just being an aggregated, synthesized training data set for ML, that then basically going back to the evolution of SEO and search, back from the days of PageRank starting with keyword focus through ML, different evolutions of the algorithm, helpful content being near the end of that, into Gemini and LLMs that then are influencing the way the algorithm operates. So as I said, I think we've always been dealing with that and really trying to stop feeling so mysticized about what the impact of AI is within SEO. If we look at what Gemini maybe does to a search result, instead of the traditional keyword-based search, it's trying to understand and retrieve contextually relevant information for that user's search. So whilst before it might have broken apart the words within that search into best places, Gemini can understand without any of the words within what it's described as someone's looking for, actually within that original search. So they understand that someone's looking for travel recommendations in that query, as opposed to breaking it apart like traditional search might have done. But obviously behind the scenes, Gemini is doing a lot of things in order to get to that point, a lot of deep learning and understanding about a topic to understand the user's intent, as well as natural language processing on top of that. So bearing that in mind, I guess what we were trying to do is how can we mimic this? How can we make that understanding something that we can then operate with? So the way we saw it is there's certain things we kind of can understand that maybe Gemini is doing behind the scenes. It will have an understanding of the content types that are available and what's being served within someone's websites. It'll be able to filter out the noise, so understand the website structure, what content is actually relevant within that. Perform NLP, as I said, and draw on that massive LLM knowledge of topics and understanding about what users may or may not be looking for. It'll also be carrying out its own kind of searches to work out content that would appear for related topics. And as we all know, within that algorithm, applying the expertise, authority, and trust criteria. And finally, also having some form of memory, so understanding what the user may have looked at before, and understanding what might be more contextually relevant to them. So we took that, and then as the engineering team within Tug, we then developed our own tool, helpful content tool. I'm not a branding person, so it is kind of very Ron-Seal what we've named it. But basically, we built that within Google Cloud Platform. And what I wanted to briefly talk you through is how we achieved that, and how you could potentially go out and start looking at doing something similar if you hadn't already. So the key ingredients within Google Cloud Platform that we're using to achieve this, we needed some input points, so Google Sheets or BigQuery. BigQuery is probably a more suitable solution for scaling this over large content sets. Then Cloud Run, Gemini API, which was basically, we were utilizing that through a lot of use of Vertex AI. So within that, that's the housing point for our interface with that. And then back to BigQuery for processing, calculations, so on. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some additional options were around cloud storage and cloud pub sub, which again, I'll explain how those fit into this, but the key ingredients there you'll see on the left. So preparing the inputs, as I said, you would have a list of URLs potentially that you want to run through this, including a suggested or planned user intent. So like we talked about before in the speech before this, about understanding search intent, you want to be able to apply what you consider to be the intended intent for that piece of content. And as I said, loading that from BigQuery or Google Sheets. Cloud Run function then is running that ingestion of the data. You need to check for errors like any kind of scalable process. You also will want to be limiting the number that you're feeding in, because AI processing is quite intensive and you don't really want to be loading thousands in all at once. They want to be chunked and done at periods. Moving on to the real grunt work of this, so we're then starting an API connection to the Gemini API itself. This is then pulling out the knowledge that Gemini has on that topic and on that subject. Then moving through to the actual model running stage. So this is the model that we've developed in ourselves. This is, as I said, mimicking some of those behaviors that I described before that we consider Gemini within Google's algorithm to be performing. So simulating Google searches, drawing on the LLM knowledge, applying natural language processing to the content that it's ingesting. So it's scraped all of that content from the URLs you brought in. It's now analyzing its understanding of that, applying those expertise, authority, trust guidelines, and setting the model against that. So we're then able to apply all of our model against the data that we've then scraped, understood from the content URLs we've put in. Then that gets shifted back into BigQuery, where we'll store the outputs and apply some calculating scores. The reason I draw this up, and the table's probably not that interesting to look at, to be honest, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is you want to be applying some weighting and scoring to these different factors from what the model has established, so that you can then come up with an actual score of helpfulness. And the reason that's really important is because you then want to be able to look at that across a whole content portfolio and understand where your issues might be lying. We'll send that back into something like Looker Studio. You can use any dashboard you want, or even just a spreadsheet. But essentially, this is allowing the team as a whole, and if you've got distributed teams across a large organization, you can then see in one place where there's potentially low scoring content that might want to be improved. And then crucially, as I mentioned with that score, you can then correlate that score against SEO performance. So the team can then see where those issues are, whether that relates to performance, and then as they make those improvements over time, the correlated performance improvement that's achieved. Just going back to those points about the additional steps. So cloud storage can be used for a situation where maybe you've got unpublished content. So if you've got a lot of blog content you want to check against this model, you'd need to put it in cloud storage to feed into something like this. Cloud Pub Sub will be allowing you to schedule that, so you can then monitor that score over time and regularly be checking, because not only will you be making changes to that content, but the LLM understanding of that topic may change over time because LLMs will evolve. So anyway, hopefully that's a brief explanation about how we achieved that. But I suppose you're kind of asking the question, does it work? I wouldn't be up here if it doesn't. But basically making things helpful was an important thing for a lot of our clients to understand. So just a brief case study I'll give you here around Thorpe Park, which is one of our clients we work with. They came to us with the challenge of obviously improving their visibility around the Halloween period when they have a lot of events on at the theme park. One of them being a scare maze that they have has quite a high volume of monthly searches there at the peak period. By what I mean, run up to Halloween, you'll be getting about 24,000 searches a month. And the tool was able to establish we had about a 57% helpfulness score against that particular piece of content. So what that tool then came out with was specific recommendations and areas that we needed to focus on. There's a whole massive list of things that it will look at, but these are 4 that it would potentially pulled out as being needing improvement. So there's originality, trustworthy, comprehensiveness, and shareability. And you can see what the scores were that were leading to that 57% score at that point. If we look at originality, I guess some of the things it would pull out and suggested was that it wasn't demonstrating substantial additional value within the content that was there, and also wasn't really demonstrating what the visitors could expect from the maze. Now, do bear in mind that what it's looking at is other content online as well related to that search, and understanding what good looks like within that type of content on all available content online. So what you're trying to see is, how does the LLM synthesize that, understand whether your content deserves to be seen as helpful in this space, rather than just, have you got the right keywords, have you got the right content on the site? So it's very specific what it's saying you should do. The team went away and then applied detailed sensory ratings for each of the mazes, shock rating as well, and experience description. So really just enhancing it. And as I said, this may seem like stuff you'd do anyway. You'd want to improve the quality of the content, but this is really leaning it towards specifically what the LLM understanding of helpfulness would be for that. And so the tool was able to establish a shift from 6 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 for that particular point. Trustworthiness, demonstrating care, and also reinforcing the trust within the idea of a theme park. AI can understand that a theme park is potentially a slightly dangerous environment, or at least could be perceived as that. And so it's wanting to demonstrate that you need to have more content to reinforce that safety and accessibility as well. So the team were then adding content around wheelchair accessibility, cold weather recommendations, and also age advice. And you can see the score shifted a little bit there as well. Not a massive amount on that one. And then comprehensiveness. I guess this is probably a similar thing for most content, is how in-depth was it? And maybe just demonstrating more thematic elements of the maze. Again, just reminder that this is it saying this is what it's seeing, as opposed to just generic, you need to write more content, which can often be the comprehensiveness interpretation. So the team's adding more backstories to the characters, giving the maze more vivid sense of experience. And that was able to shift that score from 5 to 7. And then shareability isn't just about adding share icon on a piece of content. It's about making it more sticky, making people come back. And so what they were able to then do is suggest bringing extra clothes in case it gets wet or dirty. That running away from monsters takes up energy, so bring more stacks. And then maps and directions to the mazes within that location. So again, that was a decent shift from 5 to 7. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of results? That's the key point. So we're able to get that score then from 57 up to 75. And you can see a nice little bit of correlation there that we've managed to get the average position up by 13 for the keywords across that particular page right in time for Halloween. And we're able to get number 1 for Scare Maze. So again, this is correlation, but it was fairly clear improvement in the quality of the content and the healthiness that could have been perceived by Gemini-driven AI. And that's the point we're trying to make. That leads to a 66% improvement in year-on-year sessions, and crucially for the client, 130% increase in revenue year-on-year for that particular page. So it was a really amazing result for the team and demonstrated the efficacy of using this kind of approach to content, and also really made it more efficient about what we needed to do, what were the focuses that we should make in terms of content on the website. Just one thing I wanted to touch on briefly while I've still got a few more minutes is something that get raised up Brighton SEO quite a few times in the past is around, as an industry, how we need to shift away from just correlation analysis. So I did show you a bunch of correlation graphs, but I think we need to move, and then the next stage on this would be looking at more causal analysis, so providing statistical evidence of actual impact as opposed to graphs that show something happening and something else happening over there. And that will really start to build the confidence in investment in content, investment in making these changes, and impact and causal-based analysis is what CFOs, what senior people in organizations want to be able to see, as opposed to just correlation. So if I can emphasize anything, it would be take it to that next step. So just running over what we've learned, hopefully, not just Tug itself, but you hopefully here today. Let's not get too distracted by generative AI and think, again, as SEOs, like I said, I started out my career as a developer, and I really want to emphasize that thinking in that way, interrogating what the potential criteria and parameters are around what the algorithms are doing is still really core to what SEO is about. So yeah, I mean, still do generative stuff, but don't get too distracted. Harness the Gemini API. I guess what I'm saying is use the underlying technology. Don't just use Gemini as an interface and how you improve your content. Understand the mechanics and the technology behind that and try and mimic and synthesize that. Yeah, sorry, that was my quote. Try to mimic how LLM-driven algorithms may interpret your content. Is really going to be crucial for how we continue. I appreciate the future of SERPs may be something completely different. We don't know that, but right now, the ranking positions in Google are influenced by this stuff, so you're going to need to do that. Content efficiency, I suppose that's this point. In order to scale this efficiently, you need to have a process in place. You need to have technology in place that allows you to do that at scale, because otherwise it won't be efficient if you're doing this individually, piece of content by piece of content. I do emphasize implying a calculated metric will really help, not only in terms of prioritizing, working out what you should focus on, but also to then allow you to overlay that against those traditional KPIs and provide that correlated evidence. And like I said, look for that causal-based analysis as well to just be really sure and help give the evidence needed to unlock that investment in content. And finally, listen to the Dr. Bubbles in your world. Sometimes they trigger thoughts and ideas that maybe you weren't thinking about before. Thank you.
Demand Sphere. Limitless visual insights from the SERPs. Unlimited dashboards and users. Easy to use and easy to scale your growth to new levels.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.